Elias Granger knew the snow was coming. He could smell it in the iron-sharp scent of the pines and feel it in the ache that settled deep in his left shoulder, where the old burn scar tissue pulled tightest. He lived by the seasons, and the seasons in the high Rockies cared nothing for a man's wants. They demanded preparation, and preparation demanded solitude. For 10 years, Elias had been a ghost, a rumor spoken of in the valley towns, if he was spoken of at all. He kept to the high ridges, trapping marten and beaver, hunting just enough deer to jerk and see him through the deep freeze. His cabin was built of timber he had felled and notched himself, chinked with mud and moss. It stood in a small clearing, protected by a sheer granite face to the north. It was a fortress against the wind, and against memory. He had come up here after the fire, after the shouting and the pointing fingers, after the funeral for a woman and child he had tried, and failed, to save. The world of men had decided he was a monster, or at best, a curse. After a while, he had started to agree with them. Here, at 10,000 feet, the only judgment came from the sky. He spent his winters alone. The snow was a blessing. It was a white wall that shut the world out, locking him in with the howl of the wind and the crackle of his stove. The silence was clean. He was checking the seal on his woodshed, sighting the gray clouds boiling over the peaks. When he heard it, it was a sound so wrong, so out of place, that he froze. It was not the jingle of a pack mule or the crunch of a hunter's boot. It was the rumble of heavy wheels and the strained complaint of axle grease in the cold. Elias moved to the tree line, his hand settling on the worn grip of the hunting knife at his belt. A carriage, a private stagecoach, black and polished, looking ridiculous and fragile against the towering spruce. It was being pulled by 4 exhausted horses, their breath pluming like steam. A driver, wrapped in oilcloth, sat hunched and miserable on the box. The carriage lurched to a halt in the clearing. The driver did not move, but the door was pushed open from the inside. She stepped out. She was the finest thing Elias had seen in a decade, and she looked as angry as a wet hornet. She wore a traveling suit of dark blue wool, tailored in a way that spoke of cities Elias knew only by name: New York, Boston, Philadelphia. A small, fashionable hat was pinned to dark hair pulled back severely. She was elegant, sharp, and her face was pale with fury. She took one look at the primitive cabin, the stacked wood, the hanging pelts, and then at Elias, who stood half hidden by the trees. Her lip curled. "I was told I would find a man named Elias Granger here," she said. Her voice was sharp, clear, and carried the unmistakable accent of Eastern money. Elias did not move. He just watched her. He had learned that silence made most people uncomfortable. They rushed to fill it, and in doing so, revealed themselves. She pulled her coat tighter. The first flakes of snow, large and wet, began to drift from the gray sky. "Are you him?" she demanded. "Or are you just some savage squatting on this miserable land?" Elias stepped fully into the clearing. He was a large man, made larger by his buckskins. His beard was untrimmed, his hair long and tied back with a leather thong. He knew what she saw. She saw the rumors. "I'm Granger," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. "Thank God," she snapped, though she looked anything but thankful. "Get your things. We have to go to town." He almost smiled. It would have been a rusty expression. "I don't go to town." "You do today. My father, in his infinite wisdom, left me this wilderness." She waved a gloved hand at the mountains, as if dismissing them. "Or rather, he left me the deed to a worthless ranch down in the valley, the Langford property. I am Evelyn Langford." Elias's stillness sharpened. The Langford ranch. He knew it. He had passed it many times. It was overgrown, the main house half collapsed, but the land was good. The stream that ran through it was steady. It was a place a man could build a life, if he had the strength. "That's your trouble, miss, not mine." Evelyn Langford marched toward him, her fine boots sinking into the mud and pine needles. The snow was sticking to her shoulders now. "It becomes your trouble, Mr. Granger, if you want that land." He stopped. What? My father tied his will in knots. I cannot claim my full inheritance, the part that matters, the part back east, unless I am married by my 25th birthday. Elias just stared at her. My birthday, she said, her voice tight with humiliation, is in 2 weeks. He understood the desperation now, but he didn't understand his part in it. So, go find a husband. The valley's full of fools. I do not want a husband, she spat, as if the word were poison. I need a signature on a paper. I need a legal proceeding to satisfy a team of lawyers 1,000 miles from here. I need a man who has no ties, no ambition, and who will disappear the moment the ink is dry. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his buckskins and the grime on his hands. You seem perfectly qualified. Elias turned his back on her and began to check the latches on his cabin window. Go away, miss. The snow's coming. You don't want to be caught in it. I am offering you a trade, she cried, her voice rising. A wedding, in name only. We sign the preacher's book. You stay up here. I go back east. We do not see each other again for 1 year, at which point the marriage is dissolved. In return, I will sign over the deed to the Langford Ranch. It will be yours. Free and clear. He stopped. Land. His own land. Not squatting, not hiding, but owning. It was a future. It was a place to wash away the past, to build something that wasn't soaked in ash. He could run cattle. He could be something other than the mountain ghost. He turned slowly. He was suspicious. This was a trap. Things this good were always traps. Why me? He asked, his voice low. Why ride all the way up here for me? Town's full of men who'd take that deal. Her face hardened. Because the men in town would talk. They would posture. They would assume the arrangement included other things. They would make claims. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something under the anger. It looked like fear. I am told you do not speak to anyone, that you want nothing from anyone. That makes you the safest man in this territory. She was right. He wanted nothing from her. But the land, God help him. He wanted the land. It was a hunger he had almost forgotten. A wedding, he said. A piece of paper, she corrected. And the deed? My lawyer in town has it drawn up. It will be filed the moment the marriage certificate is signed. He looked at the sky. The snow was falling thicker now, no longer drifting but driving. They had to go now, or they would not go at all. This was a fool's errand. It was madness. It was tying himself to the world of men again, the world that had tried to hang him. But it was a ranch. I'll get my mule, he said gruffly. The journey down was silent and brutal. Elias rode his mule. Jed, who was smarter than most men he knew. Evelyn sat stiff-backed in her carriage, the driver cursing the horses as they slipped and stumbled on the narrow, icy track. The town of Gideon's Gulch was not much. It was a muddy main street with a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a combined assay office and lawyer's shanty. At the end of the street sat a small, clapboard mission with a leaning cross. As they pulled up, the town stopped. Faces appeared in the saloon windows. Men stopped loading wagons. Elias Granger coming to town. That was rare enough. But coming to town with a high-mannered woman in a private coach, that was a story that would be told for months. Elias ignored them. He had lived with stares. He dismounted and tied Jed to the rail, his movements economical and sure. Evelyn stepped out of the carriage, her chin high. She gathered her skirts, avoiding the mud, and marched past the whispering locals as if they were nothing but fence posts. Her elegance was a weapon, and it was a stark, shocking contrast to Elias. He was the mountain, rough, wild, and dangerous. She was the city, all sharp lines, fine wool, and cold disapproval. The tension between them was a visible thing. It crackled in the cold air. They found the preacher, Brother Hobb, in the back of the mission, trying to fix a leak in the roof with a bucket of tar. He was a thin man with a stained beard and the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much sin and not enough salvation. Granger, he said, nodding. He did not sound surprised. He just sounded tired. What trouble do you bring? No trouble. Preacher, Evelyn cut in, her voice crisp. We are here to be married. Here is the license. We require your signature and a brief ceremony. Brother Hob looked from her expensive coat to Elias's worn buckskins. He looked at the license, then back at them. You too? He asked. Is there a problem with that? Evelyn said. Ma'am, the preacher said slowly, wiping his tarred hands on a rag. A marriage is a holy sacrament. It's the joining of two souls in the sight of God. It ain't a land deal. Elias saw her flinch, but her voice was cold. I am offering a $50 donation to the mission for your time. Brother Hob, we are in a hurry. The preacher looked at the rotting floorboards of his mission. $50 would buy a new roof. He sighed, a long, mournful sound. It's a sin to use the Lord's house for a lie, he muttered. Then we will do it in the street. Evelyn snapped. No, Elias said, his voice a low rumble. He looked at the preacher. Do it here. Do it now. It's legal. That's all that matters. The ceremony was the coldest thing Elias had ever endured, and he had survived winters that froze the marrow in his bones. They stood before the preacher's makeshift altar. The mission smelled of damp wood, stale whiskey, and tar. Brother Hob read the words quickly, his voice flat. Elias stared at a crack in the far wall. Evelyn stared straight ahead, her face a pale, beautiful mask. When it came time for the vows, Elias's I do was a grunt. Evelyn's was clear and brittle, like ice snapping. I reckon you don't have rings, the preacher said. They are not required. Evelyn stated. The Lord requires a sign. Hob insisted. Stubborn now. Elias sighed in irritation. He fumbled in his pouch and pulled out a leather thong. With his knife, he cut a small, neat loop from it. He held it out. Evelyn stared at the greasy piece of leather with open disgust. Ma'am, the preacher prodded. Her hand was bare, pale, and trembling slightly. Elias took it. Her skin was soft, shockingly so. He slipped the leather loop onto her ring finger. It looked crude and wrong against her smooth skin. I now pronounce you man and wife, Brother Hob said. He did not add, what God has joined. He just closed his book. Sign the register. They signed. Elias Granger. His script was rough, self-taught. Evelyn Langford. Her name was elegant, flowing. Then she paused, struck a line through Langford, and wrote Granger. She looked at the name, and her expression was one of absolute desolation. The ride back was worse. The sky had opened. The snow was no longer falling. It was a white, horizontal assault. The wind howled, a high, thin scream that cut through their clothes. Elias had wanted to stay in town, to wait out the storm at the livery, but Evelyn had refused. She wanted to get back to the coach, back to her things, and, he suspected, away from the prying eyes of the town. She wanted the transaction to be over. Now, they were paying for her pride. Elias rode ahead on Jed, trying to find the track. The carriage driver, half frozen and terrified, fought to keep the horses from bolting. Evelyn was a prisoner inside the rocking, swaying box. It was near dusk, the light a sickly gray. When the accident happened, the track ran along a high ridge, with a steep drop to the east. Elias was 20 yards ahead when he heard the crack of wood and a human scream. He spun Jed around. The carriage had vanished. No, not vanished. It had slipped. The left rear wheel had broken through a patch of ice-covered ground. And the entire coach was sliding, tilting, over the edge of the ravine. The horses screamed, pulling against their harnesses. The driver, thrown from his box, was already tumbling down the slope, a dark shape against the snow. Elias was off the mule before he'd even stopped. He ran, pulling his knife. The carriage balanced for one terrible second, then tipped. He grabbed the harness of the nearest horse and sliced the leather, screaming at the animal. Go! Get! He cut the second horse free. They scrambled, wild-eyed, back onto the track. But the carriage was too far gone. It was sliding, picking up speed. He wrenched the door open. Evelyn was inside, white-faced, clinging to the strap. Jump! He roared. She stared at him, frozen in terror. "Jump now!" He grabbed her arm, yanking her bodily from the tilting carriage. She fell into the snow at his feet. A second later, the carriage tore free from the remaining harness and plunged into the ravine, disappearing into the white void with a crash of splintering wood. There was silence, save for the wind. Evelyn was on her hands and knees, shaking. Her hat was gone, her dark hair pulling free. Elias hauled her to her feet. "Are you broke?" he yelled over the wind. I don't. We have to move. Now!" He half dragged her to Jed. He threw her onto the mule's back, then mounted behind her, pulling her against his chest. She was soaked. The snow had gotten inside her fine coat. She was shivering so hard her teeth rattled. The last mile to his cabin was a fight for every breath. The world was gone, reduced to a swirling vortex of white. Elias navigated by the slope of the land and the shape of the trees he knew by heart. He held Evelyn pinned against him, his arm locked around her waist. He could feel the violent, desperate shivers racking her body. She was small, lighter than a feed sack, and she felt impossibly fragile. He kept his head down, the wind tearing at his beard. This was not part of the deal. This was survival. He kicked the cabin door open and it slammed back against the wall. The embers in the stove glowed faintly. The single room was frigid. He slid off the mule, pulling Evelyn with him. Her legs buckled. He lifted her easily, like a child, and carried her inside. He dumped her unceremoniously on his cot, which was covered in a thick buffalo hide. She was already past shivering. She was pale, her lips turning a faint blue. Elias moved with a desperate, animal efficiency. He slammed the door, rammed the bar home against the storm. He threw new wood into the stove, using his last precious kindling. He did not have time for modesty. He did not have time for propriety. He went back to the cot. Evelyn was conscious, but barely. Her eyes were half open, glazed. "You're freezing to death," he growled. He pulled his knife. She flinched, her eyes widening. "Hold still," he ordered. He didn't bother with the fine buttons. He grabbed the front of her wet wool jacket and sliced it open. He did the same with the silk blouse beneath it and the complicated, useless layers of her undergarments. He cut the clothes from her body, peeling the wet, icy fabric away like a pelt. He saw the pale, thin scars on her wrists. They were old, white, and deliberate. He registered them, filed them away, and did not pause. In seconds, she was naked. He grabbed the driest fur he had, a heavy bearskin, and wrapped her in it, swaddling her tightly. He rubbed her hands and feet, his calloused palms scraping her cold skin, trying to force the life back into her. "Damn you," he muttered. Not at her, but at the situation, at the storm, at the city-bred foolishness that had brought her here. He fed the fire until it roared, the stovepipes ticking with heat. The small cabin began to fill with warmth. He melted snow in a pot, adding a spoonful of dried broth and forcing her to drink. For hours, they said nothing. She lay in his bed, wrapped in his furs, her body slowly, agonizingly, stopping its tremors. He sat on the floor, his back to the wall, his rifle across his knees. They were prisoners together, man and wife. The blizzard howled. It was the only sound. As the cabin grew warmer, she regained her voice. My driver." "Gone," Elias said. He didn't know if the man was dead or had just run. It didn't matter. He wasn't here. "The carriage. Lost." She closed her eyes. "This is a disaster." Elias just grunted. Disaster was a fire that trapped a family. This was just weather. They sat in the small, warm space. Two strangers bound by a lie in a blizzard. The pretense of their deal, the clean transaction, was gone, buried under the snow with her carriage. He watched her. She was not as soft as he had thought. There was a wiry strength to her, a core of anger that seemed to be the only thing that had kept her from breaking. She watched him. She watched his hands as he stoked the fire. They were scarred, the knuckles split, the palms like worn leather. They were the hands of a man who fought the world every day and won. They were the same hands that had cut her clothes off, and the same hands that had forced warm broth between her lips. She did not know what to make of them. Night fell. The storm did not ease. Elias checked on Jed, who was safe in the small lean-to, then barred the door again. He added more wood to the fire. "You take the cot," he said. It wasn't a request. "Where will you sleep?" "Floor." He spread a thinner deer hide near the stove. His back to her. He could hear her breathing, the rustle of the furs as she shifted. The cabin was too small. He was aware of every move she made. He must have slept, because the sound woke him. It was a small sound, a choked gasp. He was on his feet in an instant, the rifle in his hands, his eyes scanning the dark. It came from the cot. Evelyn was moving, twisting in the furs. She was dreaming. "No," she whispered, a sharp, terrified sound. "No, Silas, please, get off." She wasn't dreaming of the crash. She was dreaming of a man. She cried out, a muffled sob, and woke herself. Sitting bolt upright, she was breathing in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the storm. She looked at Elias, a dark shape in the firelight, and shrank back. He saw her fear. He knew what she saw, a large, rough man, a stranger, in a locked cabin, standing over her. It was the stuff of nightmares. He lowered the rifle. He did not move closer. He did not offer comfort. He did not touch her. He just sat down on the floor, a few feet from the cot, and leaned his rifle against his leg. He looked at the stove, not at her. "You're safe here," he said. His voice was a low rumble, rough as gravel. "The storm can't get in. Nothing else can. Neither." He did not ask who Silas was. He did not ask about the dream. Evelyn watched him. Her breathing was still ragged. She pulled the bearskin up to her chin. He was a solid, unmovable presence in the dim light. He had not touched her. He had not spoken a soft word. He had just stated a fact. "You are safe here." He sat, awake and still, a guard at the foot of her bed. She did not cry again. She watched the broad line of his shoulders, the way the firelight caught the barrel of his rifle. She watched him until the gray, snowy light of morning began to creep through the single window, and for the first time in a very long time, she believed it. She was safe. The quiet and the marriage had begun. The storm did not end. It paused, gathered its strength, and then returned with a silent, white fury that buried the world. For 3 days and 3 nights, the wind hammered the cabin, a high-pitched, maddening scream that seemed to come from inside their own skulls. When the wind finally died, the silence that fell was heavy and absolute. They were sealed in. The snow was a solid wall. Halfway up the cabin's single door, Elias had to climb out the window, shovel in hand, and carve a trench to the outside world. When he was done, they lived at the bottom of a white canyon. The sky was a slit of brilliant, cold blue far above. The world was reduced to the 12 by 14-foot space of the cabin. At first, the isolation was a novelty to Evelyn. Then, an irritation. By the end of the first week, it was a prison. The man who shared it with her was a silent, brooding warden, one who seemed entirely unaffected by their confinement. Elias had a rhythm, as unchanging as the slow crawl of the winter sun. He rose before light, fed the fire, checked his snares, and tended to Jed. He spent hours sharpening his knives, resealing his boots with grease, and carving small, intricate figures from scraps of pine. He did not speak unless a thing needed to be said. Evelyn, with no carriage to escape to, no driver to command, and no finery to manage, was utterly useless. The cold was her first enemy. Her fine wool suit, even dry, was no match for a cold that seeped through the chinking. She huddled by the stove, feeding it stick by stick, until Elias's low growl stopped her. "You'll burn through a month's wood in 2 days," he said, not looking up from a trap he was mending. "Put on the coat." He meant the buffalo hide he had wrapped her in the first night. She recoiled. It was heavy, stiff, and smelled of dust and animal. "I will not wear that." "Then freeze!" She lasted another hour, her shivering growing violent. She put on the coat. It was like wrapping herself in a wall. The animal smell was strong, but so was the warmth. She felt clumsy, savage. Her second enemy was hunger. Elias portioned out their food, jerky, dried beans, and a coarse ground flour. He showed her how to make bannock in the skillet. Her first attempt was a disaster. She left it on the fire too long, and the outside turned to a black, bitter crust, while the inside remained a paste of raw dough. She threw it on the floor in disgust. "I cannot eat this." Elias did not look at her. He picked up the ruined bread, broke off the burnt edges, and ate the doughy center without expression. He scraped the skillet clean and, with a few economical movements, made his own. He ate it slowly, tearing pieces off with his teeth. Eunice felt a hot, childish spike of resentment. He had not offered her any. He had not offered her comfort. He was treating her like an unwelcome stray. "You are a loathsome man," she said, her voice shaking. He finished his bread and wiped his hands on his buckskins. "Waste is loathsome. Miss, up here, it's a sin. You made it, you eat it, or you go hungry." She went hungry. By the next morning, the ache in her stomach was sharper than her pride. She made the bread again. This time, she watched the pan, her face tight with concentration. It was thick, heavy, and scorched in places. But it was cooked. She ate every crumb, the resentment slowly giving way to a grudging, bitter respect. He taught her other things, not with words, but with action. He would simply hand her the axe. The first time, she could barely lift it. She swung at a log and the heavy head glanced off, skittering dangerously near her own boot. Elias took the axe from her trembling hands. "You'll lose a foot." He didn't take over the chore. He grabbed a smaller log, stood it on end, and showed her how to set the wedge. He handed her the heavy mallet. "Split, don't chop, aim for the center." It was brutal, exhausting work. Her soft hands blistered, then bled. She cried, the tears freezing on her cheeks, but the woodpile inside the cabin grew. Elias never praised her. He just nodded once, a curt dip of his chin. When he saw the stack, it felt, to Evelyn, like a coronation. She began to watch him. She studied the quiet efficiency of his movements. He wasted nothing, not a word, not a motion, not a piece of wood. When he skinned the single rabbit he caught in his snare, his hands were quick, precise, and respectful. He used the meat, the pelt, even the bones, which he boiled for broth. This was not a man hiding. This was a man who belonged. She, with her Eastern manners and her useless anger, was the one who was out of place. She was the ghost here. One afternoon, in the third week, the cabin grew warm enough from the pale sun on the roof that the snow water bucket was almost half full. Evelyn looked at her own hands, grimed with soot and pine tar, and felt a desperate, clawing need to be clean. She heated the water in the big pot over the stove, the cabin filled with damp steam, a strange, humid contrast to the ice world outside. Elias sat in his usual spot, carving. He watched her from under his brows. She unpinned her hair. It had been weeks since she had done more than braid it. It fell, heavy and dark, almost to her waist. She took the bar of harsh lye soap and, turning her back to him, leaned over the metal basin. She worked the soap into her scalp, the scent sharp and clean. She rinsed, the water shockingly cold as it ran down her back. Elias stopped carving. The small knife grew still in his hand. He was not seeing her. He was seeing a different woman, with hair the color of corn silk, standing by a different fire. Sarah. He remembered the smell of the lavender soap she used, a smell that had meant home and safety and a life he had almost believed he deserved. He remembered her laughing as she dried her hair by the hearth, the firelight turning it to spun gold. The memory soured, as it always did. The smell of lavender turned to the acrid stink of pine resin and burning cloth. The firelight became the inferno. The sound of her laughter became the shriek of timbers collapsing. And then, silence. A silence worse than the screaming. His fault. His. He stood so quickly his stool clattered to the floor. Evelyn spun around, her wet hair clinging to her. her hands clutching the towel to her chest. "What? What is it?" Elias was pale, his jaw rigid. He looked at her, but his eyes were seeing the flames. "The soap," he said, his voice a rasp. "It's strong." He ripped the door open, breaking the bar, and plunged outside into the snow trench. He stood there, his back to the cabin, breathing the razor-sharp air in great, ragged gulps. He pressed his palms against the ice-cold wall of snow until the panic subsided, until the images of the fire were frozen and pushed back down. When he returned, the cabin was cold. He barred the door, his face a mask of stone. Evelyn was sitting on the cot, her hair braided, her expression frightened and confused. He did not look at her. He just went back to his carving. But his hands were no longer steady. The small, unspoken truce of their survival was broken. The tension was back. But it was no longer hers. It was his. A few days later, Evelyn was tending the stew, a thin broth of beans and the last of the rabbit. She was learning. She moved the pot, her hand wrapped in a rag. But the rag was damp. The moment she grabbed the iron handle, the wet cloth transferred the searing heat instantly. She screamed, a sharp, piercing sound, and dropped the pot. Stew and hot metal skittered across the floor. Elias was on her in a second. He saw her clutching her hand to her chest, her face white with pain. He didn't ask. He grabbed her arm, dragged her to the water bucket, and plunged her burned hand deep into the icy slush. Evelyn cried out again, the shock of the cold as painful as the burn. "Hold it there," he commanded. He righted the pot, his expression grim as he looked at the lost meal. Then he went to his small chest and pulled out a tin and a roll of clean linen. "Give it to me." She pulled her hand from the water, shaking. Her palm was a furious, blistering red. He took her hand. His own was rough, scarred, and covered in calluses. He was so large. She felt his presence loom over her like a mountain. But his touch was impossibly gentle. He opened the tin. The scent of pine resin and something herbal filled the air. With 2 fingers, he scooped a thick salve and spread it over her burn. She flinched, but the salve was cooling. His calloused thumb brushed the sensitive skin of her wrist, sending a different kind of shock through her. He worked in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wrapped her hand neatly, his movements practiced and sure. The entire cabin seemed to be holding its breath. All she could hear was the low hiss of the stove and the sound of her own breathing. He finished the knot, but he did not let go. He held her bandaged hand in his, looking at the clumsy wrapping, not at her face. Evelyn spoke, her voice barely a whisper, just to break the suffocating quiet. "Why are you here, Elias?" He finally looked up. His eyes were gray, deep-set, and held more pain than she had ever seen in a man. "What?" "Here," she said, gesturing to the cabin. "The mountains. Why do you live alone? People say you are a ghost. They say you are dangerous. But you just patched my hand." He dropped her hand as if it, too, had burned him. He turned away, going to the stove, adding wood he had already added. "It's quieter up here than where I've been," he said. His back was to her. It was a half-truth, but it was an offering. She recognized it as such. She sat on the cot, cradling her wrapped hand, and gave him one of her own. "I know what that means," she said. He turned, surprised. She was not the same woman who had stepped out of the carriage. The anger in her face was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "The man I dreamed of," she said, her voice flat. "The one I cried out about. His name is Silas Croft." Elias stood by the stove, his arms crossed. He was listening. "He was my fiancé, an arrangement by our fathers. I thought he was wonderful. At first, he was handsome and wealthy, and all of New York society adored him." She looked down at her bandaged hand. "But he likes to be in control, behind closed doors. He would tell me my opinions were wrong, that my dresses were inappropriate. He would grip my arm, just a little too hard, to make me stand where he wanted." She looked up, and her eyes were dark. One night, he held me down. He just wanted to show me that he could, that I was his. He smiled while I cried. Elias's jaw tightened. The hand resting on the stove ledge curled into a fist. I went to my father, Evelyn continued, her voice breaking. I begged him to call off the engagement. He told me I was being hysterical. He said Silas was a fine man and that I needed to learn my place as a wife. He said the Croft merger was worth millions. She took a shaky breath. This inheritance, this ridiculous clause about marriage. It was my only way out. It was the only money that was truly mine, that Silas couldn't touch. This ranch, this fake wedding, it was not about money. Elias, it was about escape. I lied to you. It was not just about the land. It was about my life. He understood now. The panic on the first night, the old pale scars on her wrists. She had run from a fire, too. He said nothing. He just looked at her. And for the first time, he truly saw her. She was not a spoiled girl. She was a survivor. The cold snap broke, but the snow remained. One night, a new sound woke them. It was not the wind. It was Jed, the mule, letting out a high-pitched, terrified bray from the lean-to. In an instant, Elias was out of his bedroll, his rifle in his hand. "Stay inside," he ordered. "Bar the door." He was gone, barefoot in the snow, before she could answer. Evelyn ran to the window, rubbing the frost from the glass. The moon was nearly full, and the world outside was a brilliant, blinding landscape of white and black shadows. She saw him. A large, gray wolf, its ribs showing, was circling the lean-to. It was desperate with hunger. It saw Elias and snarled, its lips pulling back from yellow fangs. Elias raised his rifle, his form steady and dark against the snow. The wolf lunged. The shot was a deafening crack that echoed off the mountains. The wolf twisted in midair and fell, a dark stain spreading on the snow. Elias did not move. He scanned the tree line. Then, a sound that chilled Evelyn's blood. A long, mournful howl, answered by another. Closer. Elias turned and ran for the cabin. "Open the door!" he roared. She fumbled with the bar, her hands shaking. He dove inside, slamming the door just as a second shadow emerged from the trees. He dropped the bar into place and stood breathing heavily, his rifle pointed at the door. Evelyn was shaking so hard she could barely stand. The raw, sudden violence of it, the snarl, the shot, the blood. It broke the last of her composure. She stumbled forward and grabbed him. It was not a calculated move. It was a blind, animal instinct. She buried her face in his chest, her hands fisting in his buckskin shirt, clinging to the only solid, living thing in this frozen world. Elias went rigid. His entire body tensed. He could feel her heart hammering against his. He could smell the soap in her hair. He stood for a long second, his arms frozen at his sides. She did not pull away. She just trembled, taking in the scent of him, wood smoke, pine, and something uniquely male. Slowly, his arms came up. He put them around her, his hands clumsy and broad on her back. He held her. It was not gentle. It was a bracing, a holding on, as if he, too, were afraid of the shadows outside. They stood like that for a long time, in the quiet after the shot, until her trembling subsided. Finally, she let go, stepping back. Her face was pale in the moonlight from the window. I'm sorry, I was frightened. They're gone, he said. His voice was thick. The shot scared them off. The cold returned that night, deeper than before. The fire fought it, but the corners of the cabin were bitter. Elias was in his bedroll by the stove. He could hear Evelyn on the cot, across the room. She was not just shivering. Her teeth were chattering. A small, rhythmic clicking that was driving him mad. He lay there for an hour, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "You're going to be sick," he growled. "I can't," she chattered. "I can't get warm." He let out a long, heavy breath, like a man accepting a terrible burden. "Get over here." She went still. "What?" I said, "Get over here." His voice was rough. "Bring your blanket. The floor by the stove is the only warm place. Or freeze to death. It makes no mind to me." He heard the rustle of the cot, the whisper of her bare feet on the wood floor. He turned his back to her, making a space on the wide buffalo hide. She lay down, pulling her thin blanket over her. She was as stiff as a frozen rope. Keeping a 6-inch space of cold air between them, it was useless. She was still shivering. Elias swore, a low, vicious sound. He rolled over and, in one swift motion, grabbed her and yanked her against him. He pulled his own fur-lined blanket over them both, pinning her back against his chest. "For warmth," he grated out, his voice sharp. Nothing else. Eilina was rigid with terror. He was so large, so hot. His arm was a steel band around her waist. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against her shoulder blades. He was trembling. She realized, with a shock, that he was as tense as she was. He was not trembling with cold. They lay there, rigid, not sleeping, but the heat from his body was immense, a living furnace. Slowly, agonizingly, the cold retreated from her bones. The shivering stopped, her muscles unlocked, and, pressed against this dangerous, quiet man, she fell into the deepest, safest sleep she had had in years. Elias did not sleep at all. He lay awake until dawn, his body aching, holding his wife. They did not speak of it. But the next night, she did not go to the cot. She went to the bedroll by the fire. It became the new routine. They would lie back to back, a silent, practical truce against the cold. One night, as the wind howled, she spoke into the darkness. Her voice was very small. "Elias," he grunted, halfway to sleep. "I'm not scared of you." He went still. He did not know why those words cut him so deep. "I'm not scared of you." It was a gift. It was an absolution. He turned over. She had, too, in the dim light from the embers. They faced each other. Her hair was loose, her face pale. She was looking at him with an expression he could not name. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something else. He looked at her mouth. He saw the woman who had faced him down, the woman who had bled to make firewood, the woman who had trusted him enough to tell him about Silas. He leaned in. He saw her eyes flutter, but she did not pull away. Her breath caught. He was an inch from her lips. He could feel the warmth of her. He stopped. The smell of smoke, the fire, the screaming. His fault. He was a monster. He was a curse. Everything he touched, he burned. He jerked back as if he'd been struck. He rolled onto his back, staring at the dark ceiling. His jaw clenched so hard it ached. "Go to sleep, Evelyn," he whispered. He heard her sharp, small intake of breath. It was the sound of a door being quietly, firmly shut. He did not turn back. The moment the snow stopped, the silence of the cabin became a different thing. It was no longer the heavy, insulating blanket of the storm. It was the thin, brittle ice of unspoken words. For almost a week after he had pulled away from her, they had lived in a strained, choking quiet. They still slept in the same room, Elias on the floor, Evelyn on the cot. But the 6 feet between them felt like a frozen mile. He had rejected her. She had offered him a simple, human comfort, and he had flinched as if she were a flame. Now, she was all sharp edges and cold politeness, her voice as clipped and eastern as the day she had arrived. He was all shadow and guilt, retreating to his carving, whittling slivers of pine until his knuckles were white. The cabin was too small for this new, jagged tension. The thaw came with a sound like a distant gunshot. A great sheet of ice calved from the granite cliff above them and shattered in the clearing. It was followed by the first sound of dripping water, a relentless tick, tick, tick against the window pane. The world was unfreezing. Elias, his nerves stretched thin by the silence, stood and pulled on his heavy coat. "We're low on flour," he said, his voice a low rasp. "And salt. The track should be passable." Evelyn, who had been staring at the cabin wall for an hour, was on her feet in an instant. The thought of clean, open, moving air was a physical craving. "I will be ready in a minute." She had no clothes of her own, save for the ruined remains of her traveling suit. He had, weeks ago, tossed her a pair of his old buckskin trousers and a linen shirt, worn thin but clean. They were too large, belted at her waist with a piece of rope. The legs rolled up, but they were warm. She dressed, her back to him, and braided her hair. When she turned, she looked less like the lady from the carriage and more like a boy, albeit a very fragile one. The journey down was treacherous. The track was a river of mud and melting slush, the ice beneath it slick as greased iron. Elias walked, leading Jed, who had Evelyn on his back. She rode astride, like a man, her hands clinging to the mule's mane. When Gideon's Gulch came into view, Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. This was the world she had run from, the world of people and whispers and judgments. After weeks of surviving on a primal, honest level, where the only concerns were warmth and food, the sight of the muddy street felt like a threat. As they approached, the town stopped. Men who had been leaning against the saloon's porch rail stood up straight. A woman shaking a rug out a window froze, her hands mid-air. They had seen Elias Granger, the ghost, walk into town with the Langford woman. Now, almost 2 months later, they were seeing them emerge from the mountain. Together, Elias had been a story, a dark rumor. Evelyn had been a scandal, a spoiled daughter. Now, they were a legend. The whispers started before they had even dismounted. "Look there, it's Granger." "My God, is that her, the Langford girl? Heard her carriage went over the edge. Thought they was both dead. Looks like they found a way to keep warm. Shameful." A rough-looking man in a red flannel shirt spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "Langford's spoiled daughter. Shacked up with the man who burned the bar tea. Now she's just his whore." Evelyn heard it, every word. She saw the women looking at her, their faces masks of open, pious contempt. She saw the men, their eyes running over her in the ill-fitting trousers, their expressions a mix of crude speculation and amusement. Her blood ran cold. She felt the bile of humiliation rise in her throat. She had faced a blizzard, split wood until her hands bled, and starved. She had survived. And for this, Elias heard it, too. He stopped, his hand on Jed's bridle. His body went still, his shoulders bunching. He had lived with their hatred for 10 years, but this was the first time it had splashed onto someone else. Evelyn's head snapped up. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar fury. She slid off the mule, ignoring Elias's offered hand, and her boots hit the muddy street with a soft thud. She lifted her chin, her gaze sweeping over the staring faces. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a queen inspecting a rabble. "Elias," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the cold air. "The general store. I believe you said we needed flour." She marched past them, her back ramrod straight, as if she were walking through her father's ballroom in Boston. Elias watched her go, a strange, tight feeling in his chest. He tied Jed to the rail and followed, a dark shadow in her wake. The store was warm and smelled of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and oiled leather. The proprietor, a small, pinched man named Henderson, was measuring out beans for a woman. When Elias and Evelyn entered, the woman gasped and took a step back. Henderson's eyes, small and hard as pellets, landed on Elias. "We don't want your kind in here. Granger, get out." Elias had expected this. He was used to it. He never came to town unless he had to, and when he did, he traded his furs for supplies with the trappers down by the creek, avoiding the stores. He had only come here because Evelyn needed things. "Just need flour. Henderson," Elias rumbled, keeping his voice low. "And salt." "I said, get out," Henderson snapped, his courage bolstered by the other customers. He looked at Evelyn, his gaze slimy with righteousness. "And take that with you. We don't serve whores in this establishment." Elias moved. It was not a fast move, but it was final. He put his hand on the counter, his knuckles white. "You won't talk to her that way." "Or what? Granger," Henderson sneered. "You'll burn my place down, too, with my wife and child upstairs?" That was it. Elias flinched, the word burn striking him like a physical blow. The fight went out of him, his guilt a heavy yoke. He turned to leave, grabbing Evelyn's arm. "We'll go." But Evelyn did not move. She was shaking, but not from fear. It was a vibration of pure, unadulterated rage. She looked at Henderson. Her eyes narrowed to dark slits. "What did you call me?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You heard me. Missy," Henderson said, puffing out his chest. "We're decent folk here." "Decent," Evelyn repeated. She looked around the store, at the curious, cruel faces. She looked at the barrels of crackers and pickles, the bolts of cloth, the jars of preserved fruit on the counter. Her eyes landed on a large, expensive jar of brandied peaches. With a movement so fast no one saw it coming, her arm swept out. She did not just push the jar, she threw it. It hit the floorboards at Henderson's feet and exploded. The sound of shattering glass was as sharp as a gunshot. Peaches, glass, and thick, sticky syrup sprayed everywhere, spattering the proprietor's apron and the floor. The store went dead silent. "My God," a woman whispered from the back. Evelyn stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "We need 10 pounds of flour," she said, her voice vibrating. "A 2-pound block of salt, a pound of coffee, and a tin of your best salve. For my hands." She reached into the pocket of the buckskin trousers and pulled out a coin. It was a $5 gold piece, one of the few she had managed to save from her travel bag. She threw it onto the counter. It spun, ringing in the silence, and landed flat. "That," she said, "will cover the peaches and our supplies. Unless you, as a decent man, would prefer not to be paid." Henderson stared at the gold, then at the mess, then at the wild, furious woman in front of him. He saw Elias standing by the door, his face a mask of stone, and he saw that this was not a situation he could control. This was not the spoiled, soft girl they had whispered about. This was something new. He swallowed. "Martha," he croaked to his wife in the back. "Bag up the flour." They got their supplies. They walked out of the store, the entire town watching in stunned silence. Elias untied Jed, loaded the sacks, and helped Evelyn onto the mule's back. He did not say a word. He just swung up behind her, his arms settling around her waist to hold her steady. They rode out of Gideon's Gulch, leaving the whispers and the shattered jar behind them. The ride back was just as silent, but the tension was gone. It had been broken, like the jar. Elias held her, and for the first time, it was not just for warmth or safety. He kept glancing at the side of her face. He had seen men stand up to other men. He had seen brawls and gunfights, but he had never, in his entire life, seen anything like that. She had not shrunk. She had not cried. She had fought back, with the only weapons she had, her pride and a jar of peaches. He had spent 10 years running. She had stood her ground in 10 minutes. The awe he felt was a new, unsettling warmth in his chest. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, turning the snow-covered peaks a deep, bruised purple. The air was cold and clean. Elias unloaded the mule. Evelyn went inside. The cabin was cold and dark. She stirred the embers in the stove, adding wood until a small fire caught. She put the new supplies away, her movements stiff and automatic, the flour sack in the bin, the salt in the box. Elias came in, stamping the mud from his boots. He watched her. He could see the tremor in her hands, the one she had hidden from the town. She put the last tin on the shelf, and her strength gave out. The mask of fury and pride crumbled. She sat down hard on the edge of the cot and put her face in her hands. She did not sob. It was a quiet, desperate, racking sound of a person who had held on for too long. "They looked at me like I was dirt," she whispered into her palms. "They called me. They hate me. Because of you. Because I was with you." Elias stood by the door, his heart twisting. He was a fool. He had thought he was protecting her from the storm, but he had just dragged her into the center of his own cursed life. He walked to the stove, his movements heavy. He poured a cup of water from the bucket and held it out. "Here." She shook her head, not looking up. He did not know what to do. He could not touch her. He had no right. He had already destroyed her reputation. He sat on his stool, across the small room. He just sat and watched and guarded the space. You were magnificent," he said. The word sounded strange, too fine for his rough voice. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, her expression one of utter confusion. "What?" "In the store," he said, struggling. You stood them down. No one's done that. For me, I did it for me," she whispered, her voice raw. I couldn't let them say that." "It don't matter why," he said. "You did it." She looked at him, at this large, quiet, broken man who had confessed his greatest fears in his sleep. This man who pulled away from a touch, but who had stood by the door of the store, ready to fight for her. She was overwhelmed by a sudden, aching wave of gratitude. And something more, something that had been growing in the cold, silent weeks. She stood. She crossed the 3 feet of floor between them. He tensed, his eyes widening. "Evelyn," he said. "A warning." She put her hands on his shoulders, her bandaged palm resting on the rough buckskin, and she kissed him. It was hesitant. At first, a soft, trembling press of her lips to his. It was a question. It was a thank you. He tasted of coffee and wood smoke, and a deep, abiding sorrow. He was frozen for a second. Then, a low groan rumbled in his chest, and his hands came up to grip her waist. He kissed her back. For 1 second, it was everything. It was the answer to the cold, the loneliness, the fear. It was a desperate, hungry claiming. Then he shoved her away. He didn't push her. He recoiled, as if he had touched the hot stove. He scrambled to his feet, putting the stool between them, his face a mask of guilt and shame. "Don't," he said, his voice a choked rasp. "Evelyn, don't." She stared at him, devastated. It was the second time. The rejection was a cold slap, sharper than any insult from the town. "Why?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Why do you do that? Am I what they said? Am I that disgusting to you?" "No!" he roared, and the words shook the small cabin. "God, no, it ain't you. It's me." He turned his back on her, running his hands through his hair. He was pacing, a caged, wounded animal. "You heard him, Henderson? You heard what he said. Burn my place down, too. He was a cruel fool," she said. "He was right," Elias whispered, the words torn from him. "He was right. They all think I did it, and God help me. Sometimes I think it, too." He had to tell her. He had to make her see. He owed her the truth. "I wasn't always up here," he said, his voice flat and dead. 10 years ago, I was a hired hand on a ranch. The Bar T, the owner, he was a hard man, but his wife, Sarah, she was kind. They had a son, a little boy, 4 years old." He stopped, swallowing. Evelyn watched his back, her heart pounding. I don't know how it started. A lantern in the barn. It was a dry winter. The wind, it jumped to the house. It went up like tinder." He was seeing it. She could tell. He was living it, right there by the stove. "I tried to get in," he said, his voice low and urgent. "The boy, he was upstairs. I could hear him, crying. I tried to get to him, but the porch roof, it came down. The fire, it was too hot. It pinned me. I got this." He unconsciously touched his shoulder, where the old scar tissue pulled. "I failed. I tried to save them, and I failed. They died. Sarah and the boy. Both of them." He fell silent. "The posse," Evelyn whispered, remembering the nightmare she had overheard. "Aye," he said. "Her husband, he was gone, on a cattle drive. When he came back, his home was ash and his family was gone. The other hands, they were scared. They said I'd been familiar with her, that I'd been drinking. They said I must have said it, to hide, God knows what. They said I was a monster." He turned to face her, and his eyes were hollow. "So I ran. I ran before they could hang me. I came up here, where there's nothing to burn, nothing to lose, nothing for a man like me to destroy." He looked at her tear-streaked face, at her bandaged hand. "Don't you see, Evelyn? I burn everything I touch. I did it to them, And I just did it to you. Your good name. It's gone. Because of me." Evelyn stared at him, her own pain forgotten. She processed the story, the raw, undiluted agony of his confession. She saw the man who sat vigil for her, who had gently bandaged her hand, who had pulled her from the carriage. "You tried to save them," she said. It was not a question. "I failed them," he countered, his voice like iron. "That does not make you a murderer," she said, stepping toward him. "It makes you a man who tried—" He shook his head, backing away. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She advanced. He retreated until his back was against the cold cabin wall. She put her hands on his chest, pinning him. "You blame yourself. That's why you pulled away. You're afraid, not of me. You're afraid you'll hurt me." "I did hurt you," he choked out. "Today, in that town." "No," she said, her voice fierce. "You saved me. For 2 months. You have done nothing but save me." She looked up, her eyes clear and unwavering. "Elias, listen to me. Even if it was true, even if you had dropped that lantern, which I do not believe for 1 second, it wouldn't make you a monster." He stared down at her, his world tilting. He had lived 10 years as a monster. It was the only truth he knew. "It would make you a man who suffered a terrible accident," she whispered. "A man who paid for it, but I don't believe it. You are the most careful, gentle man I have ever known." He had no answer for that. He just stared at her, his chest aching, his throat tight. He was trembling. She did not kiss him again. She just stood there, her hands on his heart, and let him breathe. That night, the cold returned. The routine was broken. She did not go to the cot. He did not go to his bedroll. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the confession hanging in the air. Finally, Elias lay down on his hides by the stove, his back to her. The rejection. He thought, "She sees me for what I am." He heard her move. He tensed, waiting for the sound of the cot. Instead, he heard her footsteps on the floor. She came to his bedroll. "Elias," she whispered. "Go to the cot, Evelyn," he said, his voice thick. "It's warmer there. I'm not." "You are not a curse," she said, as if answering an unspoken question. "And I am not afraid of you." She lay down beside him, on the outside of his blanket. He did not move. He was rigid, his entire body a knot of fear. "I'll burn you, Evelyn. I swear to God, I'll destroy you." "No," she whispered, her voice right by his ear. She touched his shoulder, the one with the scar. "You'll keep me warm." She turned, pressing her cold body against his back. Elias held out for a count of 10. Then, with a sound that was half sob, half surrender, he rolled toward her. This time, he did not pull away. He kissed her, and it was not a kiss of romance. It was a collision. It was 10 years of guilt and solitude crashing into 2 months of fear and desperation. His hands were rough, shaking as he tangled them in her hair, pulling her face to his. Her hands were on his, tracing the scars on his face, his neck. It was slow, at first, hesitant, a discovery. His calloused skin against her softness, her small, brave hands against his chest. It was clumsy, and honest, and raw. Then the desperation took over. It was a need, deep and aching, to prove that they were alive. It was a fight against the ghosts in the room, the ghosts of Sarah and her child, the ghost of Silas. Their bodies moved with an urgency that had been building since the first snow, an unspoken hunger that had lived beneath the anger and the fear. He was heavy and solid and real. She was small and fierce, and here, in the middle of it, as he held her, a sharp, ragged sob broke from her throat. Elias froze, his worst fear. "I hurt you!" She shook her head, her eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking from the corners. She grabbed his arms, pulling him closer. "No!" she gasped. "No! Please don't stop!" It was not a cry of fear. It was a cry of release. The taut, terrified wire she had been walking for years, with Silas, with her father, with the storm, with him. It had finally snapped. She was safe. She was not being taken. She was taking. He held her, and he moved, and he gave her the only comfort he had. Afterward, they lay tangled in the furs. The cabin was silent, save for the low hiss of the stove and their ragged breathing. The air was thick. Elias was the first to speak. He was on his back, staring at the ceiling, his body slick with sweat. He was terrified. "This," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "This wasn't part of the deal." Evelyn was curled against his side, her head on his scarred shoulder. She lifted her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, feeling the wild, rabbit-fast beat of his heart. "Neither was this," she said. The first act of their new life was not a word. It was a waking. Elias woke, as he always did, before the sun, his body coiled and tense, the nightmares of fire and smoke clinging to him like a shroud. He woke, and for the first time in 10 years, he was not alone. Evelyn was asleep, her body turned toward him, her arm flung across his chest, her breath a soft, warm puff against his scarred shoulder. She was real. The night had been real. His first instinct was to move, to pull away, to put the cold air of the cabin between them, to reestablish the barrier that had kept him safe. His guilt was a physical, choking thing. He was a monster. He had taken advantage of her tears, of her gratitude. He had no right to this, but he did not move. He lay there, rigid as a frozen log, and watched the first pale gray light of morning touch the side of her face. He had burned his old life to the ground. He feared, just set a match to hers. When she woke, it was slowly. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and confused in the dim light. She saw him watching her. She saw the torment in his face, the self-loathing. She did not recoil. She did not act ashamed. A small, slow smile touched her lips, a smile of such profound, exhausted relief that it cracked his frozen heart. She pressed her face into his chest, a small, trusting, burrowing motion, and whispered, "Good morning, Elias." He had no words for this. He just put one large, shaking hand on her hair, his fingers clumsy. The thaw came in earnest. The world, which had been silent and white, was now loud. Water dripped from the eaves, ran in rivulets under the snow, and the creek roared with new life. The snow receded, revealing the dark, wet earth, a smell of pine and damp soil that was the smell of hope. The cabin became too small, not from tension, but from possibility. "The ranch," Elias said one morning, his voice rough as he pulled on his boots. "The deal was for the ranch. We need to see what the winter did to it." The ride down from the high country was a new one. Before, they had been a prisoner and a guard, or two strangers in a storm. Now, he rode Jed, and Evelyn sat in front of him, her back resting against his chest, his arms around her. It was a simple, unspoken statement of possession. The townspeople of Gideon's Gulch would not see this. Not yet. This was for them. The Langford property was in a high meadow, a broad, fertile valley that Elias had long admired. The main house was a 2-story ruin, its roof caved in on one side by a decade of heavy snow. The barn was better, a massive structure of good timber, listing to the north but solid. The fences were a joke, a series of rotted posts and sagging wire. Elias expected Evelyn to be dismayed. This was the worthless ranch she had railed against. She slid off the mule before he had even stopped. She walked not to the house, but to the barn. She pushed the great, heavy door, which screeched on one hinge. She looked inside at the stalls, at the hayloft, at the shafts of light piercing the roof. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft. Elias, who had been expecting disgust, was momentarily struck dumb. "It's falling down. The house is lost. The house is wood and nails," she said, turning to him. She pointed to the ground, to the stream running fast and clear 50 yards away, to the grass that was already pushing, green and fierce, through the mud. "This is the land, the water. This is real." She looked at him, and her eyes were shining. "We can fix this. You said you wanted cattle. There's enough grazing here for 100 head. We can fix the barn roof. We can live in the barn while we decide about the house." Elias looked at her. This woman, who had worn fine silks and argued over lye soap, was mapping out a life of brutal, back-breaking labor as if she were planning a cotillion. He had never, he realized, felt such a powerful surge of awe. Work began. It was the only language they both truly understood. It was the way they spoke their new truth. Elias was a force of nature. He attacked the ranch with the pent-up energy of a decade of solitude. He taught her how to set a fence post, not just by digging, but by finding the right spot, by tamping the earth, by making it strong enough to turn a charging bull. Evelyn worked. She, who had never wielded anything heavier than a silver fork, now swung a hammer. She was clumsy. She hit her thumb and swore, a word so foul that Elias stopped, looked at her, and a strange, rusty bark of a sound came out of him. She stared. "What was that?" "Nothing," he grunted, turning away, but his shoulders were shaking. "Elias Granger," she said, walking up to him, a smile spreading on her own face. Was that a laugh? "I don't laugh," he said, his voice grim, but a smile was fighting him. "Two. You did. It sounded like a bear coughing up a pine cone." He turned to her, and the smile won. It was a transformation. It cracked the hard, frozen mask of his face, and for a second, she saw the man he must have been. 10 years ago, before the fire. She laughed. Two. A sound of pure, ringing joy. And in that moment, in the mud and the ruins of a forgotten ranch, their partnership was sealed. They worked from sunup to sundown. Elias admired her strength, but he was terrified of her fragility. He watched her try to lift a roof beam, her face straining, and he would take it from her. "I can do it," she would snap, her pride stung. "I know," he would say, his voice low, "but I'm here. Let me be the mule." She learned to let him, and he learned to let her. She took over the mending of the harnesses, her small, quick fingers, now calloused, more adept than his. She took over the ledgers, the planning, the numbers. He was the brawn. She was the mind. Together, they were whole. Their nights were a different kind of work. They were a mending of a different kind. They slept in the same bedroll, their bodies tangled together. After a day of brutal labor, they would fall into sleep, into each other, with a desperation that was part in passion and part in. A deep, primal need to be anchored. He would wake in the night, the dreams of fire returning, and she would be there, a solid, living presence. She would hold his head, her fingers stroking his hair, and whisper to him, "You're safe, Elias, I'm here. It's just a dream." He, in turn, would hold her when she woke, her own nightmares of Silas, of a hand held over her mouth. Returning, he would hold her, not gently, but with a fierce, grounding strength, his large body a fortress. "I'm here," he would rumble, his voice a promise. "He ain't. He will never touch you again." Elias had been carving for 10 years, whittling his grief and his rage into small, detailed figures of animals and trees. Now, he carved for her. He kept it a secret. He would wait until she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Then he would take a small, perfect piece of mountain mahogany he had found, a piece with a deep, rich, red grain. He would sit by the dying embers of the stove and, with the tip of his sharpest knife, he would work. It was a ring. It was a simple, wide band, but he was carving into it. It was not flowers or hearts. It was the sharp, clean line of the mountain peaks that surrounded them, a circle of peaks that met and held. It was a replacement for the crude leather thong he had put on her finger, an act that had been a lie. This ring, this was the truth. He did not know when he would give it to him. He did not know if he ever could, but he needed to make it. One afternoon, while Elias was scouting the high pasture, Evelyn took it upon herself to clean out the ruined ranch house. It was a hopeless task, but it was her task. This was her father's mess. She needed to purge it. The office was in the back, a great oak desk, warped by water and snow, sat in the corner. She pulled the drawers open, the wood shrieking. They were full of moldy ledgers, bills for feed from 12 years ago. The sad, damp remains of a failed dream. She was not a fool. She knew that if she was to be Elias's partner, she needed to know everything. The land was his by their deal, but her name was on the original deed. They had to file the transfer. They needed to be legal. She pulled out the last, stuck drawer. It came free, and she saw it, a small, carved wooden panel in the bottom of the drawer space. It was a false bottom. Her heart began to pound. With trembling fingers, she pried it open. It was not a hidden treasure. It was a single folded sheaf of papers, tied with a black ribbon. It was not damp. It had been protected. It was her father's unmistakable, elegant script. It was not a letter. It was a contract. It was an agreement between her father, Charles Langford, and Silas Croft. It was an arranged marriage, drawn up by lawyers. It detailed the merger of their two family fortunes, and it was brutal in its clarity. In the event that my daughter, Evelyn Langford, refuses or is otherwise unable to complete this union, all assets, monies, and properties held in her name from the Langford estate are to be considered forfeit and shall be transferred to the trusteeship of Silas Croft, to be managed as he sees fit in compensation for the breach of faith. She read it 3 times. Her father had not just arranged her marriage. He had sold her. He had put her in a cage and given Silas the key. The inheritance, the one she had used to buy her freedom with Elias, was not hers to give. If she did not marry Silas, she was penniless. The Langford ranch, the one she had given to Elias, would default to Silas. Her entire life, her escape, her new love. It was all a fraud she had committed, however unknowingly. She did not tell Elias. How could she? How could she tell this man, who was finally, painfully, learning to trust, that their entire life was built on a lie, that the ranch he was pouring his blood and sweat into was not his, that he could lose it, all of it, because of her? She folded the paper. She put it in her pocket. She went back to the cabin, and she became distant. When he returned that night, the laughter was gone. When he touched her, she flinched, her mind 1,000 miles away. In a lawyer's office in New York, he kissed her neck, his beard rough. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said, her voice thin. "I'm tired. The work." He did not believe her. He lay beside her that night, his body next to hers, but she was gone. She was a ghost. Elias, in his terrible solitude, had only one frame of reference for this kind of loss. He had touched her, and so he had burned her. He knew it. She regretted it. She had laid with a monster, a savage, the man who burned women and children. And she was finally, rightfully, disgusted. The shame was not hers, it was his. He had ruined her, just as he had promised. He stopped touching her. He stopped laughing. The silence, the cold, heavy silence of the first weeks, returned to the cabin. More terrible than before, because now they knew what they were missing. The news came 3 days later. A young boy from the livery stable in Gideon's Gulch, paid $1 by Elias to watch for trouble, rode his pony half to death to get to the ranch. "Mr. Granger, ma'am," he yelled, sliding off the horse. You gotta come. There's a man, a fancy man, from the east. He's in town. He's got these 2 men with him. Hard men, in suits. He's at the saloon, buying drinks, and he's asking for you." "Ma'am." Evelyn's hand went to her throat. She looked at Elias. His face was gray. "He says his name is Croft," the boy panted. He says he's your fiancé, and he's come to rescue you from the savage that took you." "Silas." Elias looked at Evelyn, and his face was a mask of such cold, dead fury that she almost took a step back. This was not the man who carved rings. This was the man who had survived the posse. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not. I can explain." "Explain what?" he said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "That your fiancé is here? That the man you've been lying next to is a fool? No, please. He didn't listen. He was already walking toward the barn, toward Jed. Stay here. No, she said, running after him. No, Elias, you don't know him. He's not like you. He doesn't fight. He destroys. He uses words and paper, and he will ruin you. You can't go alone. This is my fight, he said, pulling the cinch tight. No, she said, grabbing his arm. It's mine, and I will not hide behind you. I am done running. They rode into Gideon's Gulch together. The town, which had seen them as a scandal, now sensed a reckoning. The street was quiet. People watched from behind curtains. The saloon was bright, even in the middle of the day. Silas Croft was at the bar, a glass of brandy in his hand, a stark contrast to the whiskey and beer joint. He was exactly as Evelyn had described, handsome, in a pale, sharp way, dressed in a tailored suit of dark wool, his blonde hair perfectly combed. He smelled of cologne and money. With him were two men, broad-shouldered, in derby hats, their coats buttoned. They watched the room, their hands never far from their pockets. When the bat-wing doors swung open, and Elias and Evelyn stood there, the saloon went dead quiet. Elias was a mountain. He filled the doorway, his buckskins and his beard making him look like something from a different, older world. Evelyn stood beside him, in her trousers and linen shirt, her hand fisted at her side. Silas smiled. It was a cold, bright, reptilian expression. "Evelyn, my love," he said, his voice carrying, "Thank God. I have been half mad with worry. To think of you in the hands of this thing." He stepped forward, his arms open, as if to embrace her. His hired men moved, flanking him. Evelyn did not move. "I am not your love, Silas, and I am not in his hands. I am at his side." The smile faltered. Silas's eyes narrowed. He looked at Elias, his gaze traveling from the worn boots to the long hair. It was not the gaze of a man looking at a rival. It was the gaze of a man looking at an inconvenient animal. "I see," Silas said, his voice turning to ice. "You have been corrupted. This savage has filled your head with nonsense. Well, no matter. Our agreement is not with you, my dear. It is with your father. You are coming home." Elias stepped forward, putting himself between Evelyn and Silas. "She's not going anywhere." Silas laughed, a high, mocking sound. "And who are you? The local beast? The town butcher? I've heard all about you, Mr. Granger, the man who burns women and children. A fitting companion for a woman who would break a sacred contract." Elias's hand was a blur. He grabbed the front of Silas's fine suit, lifting him half off the floor. "Say that again." The two hired men had their guns out, leveled at Elias's chest. "Put me down, you ape," Silas choked out, his face turning red. "Or they will." "Elias!" Evelyn screamed. He looked at the guns. He looked at Silas, and he let him go. He dropped him, and Silas stumbled back into his men. "You see?" Silas said, straightening his suit, his eyes gleaming with hatred. "He is a backwoods savage. He understands only violence. He will hang for this. He will hang for what he did to you, and for what he did 10 years ago." "He is my husband," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but clear. "A fraud," Silas spat. "A marriage performed under duress, with a half-mad runaway, to cheat me of what is mine. You are my property. Evelyn, bought and paid for." That was the word. Bought. It broke something in Elias. The control, the fear, the guilt. All he heard was the echo of another man. A cruel man, who had stolen his life. All he saw was this thing, claiming her. He did not grab him. He punched him. It was not a punch. It was a judgment. It was all the force of the man who split logs with a single blow. It landed on Silas's jaw with a sound like a wet branch snapping. Silas did not just fall. He flew. He crashed over a table, his body limp, and landed in a heap of broken chairs and spilled cards. He was out cold. The two hired men stood, their guns still pointed, in absolute shock. They were paid to intimidate, not to fight a grizzly. Elias stood over the fallen man. his chest heaving. The rage was on him. The red, burning rage he had kept buried. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to end this and the posse and the fire and all of it. Right here. He took a step forward. "Elias, no!" It was Evelyn. Her voice cut through the red haze. She was grabbing his arm, her fingers digging in. "Please, not for him. Don't become what they say you are. Don't let him win. Please, Elias." He looked at her. He saw her terror, not of him, but for him. He looked at his fist, at the blood on his knuckles. It was Silas's blood. He turned. He put his arm around Evelyn's waist, pulling her tight to his side. He faced the two gunmen, who were now pointing their weapons at a man who was already walking away. "Get him out of our town," Elias rumbled. And it was not a request. It was a command. He walked out of the saloon, Evelyn clinging to him. The entire town was watching as they mounted Jed and rode, fast, toward the mountains. The ride back was silent. The adrenaline of the fight gave way to a cold, sick dread. They reached the cabin, and the sun was setting. Elias slammed the door. He was vibrating, the violence still coiling in his gut. He turned on her, his face a mask of pain. "You lied to me," he said, his voice low. "No, Elias, He said bought and paid for. He said fraud. That letter, that's what it was, wasn't it? That's why you grew cold. You knew he was coming." "I didn't know he was coming," she cried, the tears she had held back finally breaking. "I didn't know until I found it, I swear." "Found what?" She pulled the contract from her pocket, the one she had been carrying for 3 days, and threw it on the table. "That, my father's will, my father's contract. He sold me to Silas, the inheritance, the ranch, all of it. It reverts to Silas if I don't marry him. Our marriage, Elias, it's void. The ranch you are building is not yours. It's his." She was sobbing now. Great, heaving sounds. I lied to you, from the very beginning, the day I came here. I told you it was just to save the land. That was a lie. I was running from him. I just wanted to be free." He was staring at the paper, his face unreadable. "I picked you," she whispered, her voice raw. "I picked you because they said you were a ghost. They said you wanted nothing. I thought I could use you. I thought I could use your name, and this land, and just run. I never meant for this." She gestured between them. At the bedroll, at the cabin, at the life they had started to build. "I didn't know what it would feel like," she choked out. "To be safe, to be respected, to be loved. I just wanted to feel free. And with you, Elias, in this cabin, I did, for the first time in my life. I was free." She looked up, her face a ruin of tears, expecting his anger, his hatred. Elias Granger said nothing. He looked at her, at the confession hanging in the air. He looked at the contract on the table, the legal, binding paper that proved his entire life was, once again, a lie. He turned. He grabbed his coat from the peg. He opened the cabin door. The cold night air rushed in, but it was not as cold as the look in his eyes. "Elias," she whispered, her voice a desperate plea. "Where are you going?" He did not look back. He walked out into the snow and the darkness, and he did not return. Evelyn did not sleep. She did not cry. She sat on the cot in the dark, cold cabin, the contract a dead weight on the table. The door Elias had walked through remained open, a black, rectangular wound letting in the frigid night air. She stared at it, at the patch of snow-covered ground he had crossed. She sat until the cold became a danger, until her limbs were numb and her breathing shallow. The numbness was a mercy. It crept from her fingers to her heart. He was gone. She had done it. She had found the one good, true man in a world of liars, and she had destroyed him with her own lies. She had given him a home, a dream, and then revealed it was all built on a foundation of her own selfish fear. He had not raged. He had not struck her. He had done what he always did. He had run. He ran from fire, and he ran from her. for she was the worst kind of fire, the one that looked like salvation. She finally rose, her joints cracking, and walked to the door. She closed it. She barred it, not to keep the world out, but to lock herself in. This was her penance. The cabin, which had been a sanctuary, was now her cell. She waited. The night passed. The gray dawn came, cold and unforgiving. He did not return. She fed the fire, her movements mechanical. She fed Jed, whose confused braying from the lean-to was the only sound. She sat at the table and stared at the contract. The second day was the same. She did not eat. She did not wash. She waited. On the third morning, she heard the sound of horses. Not one, but several. Her heart leaped. Elias, she ran to the door, fumbling with the bar, and threw it open. It was not Elias. Sheriff Brody, a man she had only seen from a distance, sat on a large bay horse. With him were 2 deputies and, trailing behind them, a very satisfied-looking Silas Croft. Silas was bruised. A dark, ugly purple stain ran from his jaw to his cheek. It only made his smile more venomous. "Evelyn, my dear," Silas called out, his voice smooth and full of false concern. "You see, I have brought the law. You are safe now." "I was always safe," she said, her voice a dead rasp. She clutched the door frame to hold herself upright. Sheriff Brody looked uncomfortable. He was a decent man. Caught in a rich man's fight? He held up a piece of paper. "Ma'am, Mrs. Granger, I have here a notice. A complaint filed by Mr. Croft. He has documents from your father. He is contesting the legality of your marriage. He is charging that you were coerced, that you were unwell, and that this man, Granger, took advantage of you to steal this land." Evelyn felt the last of her strength leave her. Coercion. He was using the very words, the very truth, of her own lie against her. "Where is he, ma'am?" the sheriff asked, his eyes scanning the empty clearing. "Where is Mr. Granger?" "He's gone," she whispered. Silas's smile widened. "Of course he is. The coward ran as soon as he was found out. It's a confession. Sheriff, he has abandoned her. The marriage is a fraud. The man is a thief. I want a warrant for his arrest." "He is not a thief," Evelyn cried, her voice breaking. "He is my husband." "A husband who has left you to face the law alone?" Silas mocked. "Sheriff, the court in the county seat will hear this. This notice gives her 1 week to appear and to show cause as to why the marriage should not be annulled and the property, as stipulated in this contract, turned over to me." "1 week," Evelyn repeated, her mind numb. "And if Mr. Granger, her so-called husband, does not appear?" Silas pushed. "Then the judge will likely rule in your favor. Mr. Croft, given the evidence of abandonment," Brody said, his voice grim. He looked at Evelyn, his gaze softening. "Ma'am, you should come to town. We can find you a room at the hotel. This ain't right. You being up here alone?" "No," she said, pulling the door open wider. She stepped out onto the porch, her small form defiant in her dirty buckskins. "I am Mrs. Granger. This is my home. I am not leaving." Silas laughed. "Have it your way. My dear, the cold will bring you to your senses. 1 week, the mountains will have what is theirs." They turned their horses and left. Evelyn stood there until the sound of their hoofbeats faded, replaced by the terrible, roaring silence of her solitude. She did not know how long she stood there. Hours. Perhaps the sun moved across the sky. She had been abandoned. Elias, the man who had faced down wolves, had run from a piece of paper. The shame she felt for him was a bitter, acidic taste in her mouth, worse than her own. Dusk was falling when she heard the sound of a single mule. She turned, her heart a cold, hard knot. Elias was riding Jed up the track. He was not hurrying. He was not running. He was just coming home. He looked exhausted. His face was gray with fatigue, his beard matted with ice. He looked as if he had not slept in 3 days. He stopped the mule, slid off, and looked at her. She was standing on the porch, a pale ghost of the woman he had left. He said nothing. He just walked past her, Into the cabin. He went to the stove, took a dipper of water, and drank it all. Evelyn followed, closing the door. The rage, so cold and slow burning, finally had a target. "You ran," she whispered, her voice shaking with it. He turned, his gray eyes heavy. I did. You left me. They came. Elias, the sheriff, Silas." "They came, and you were gone. I saw them," he said, his voice flat. "I was in the high timber. On my way back, I saw them leave." "And you still came back?" she sneered. "The hurt making her cruel. Came back to what? To watch them take it all, to run again 10 years? Elias, you ran from a fire. 3 days. You ran from this. When do you stop running?" He looked at her, and the exhaustion in his face was more profound than she could ever understand. "I didn't run from the fire. Evelyn, I ran from the posse. I ran from the rope. There's a difference." "There is no difference," she cried. "It is what you are, a man who runs." "I didn't run this time," he said, his voice dropping to a low, hard rumble. He reached inside his coat. He was carrying a roll of papers. He threw them on the table, on top of the damning contract. "I didn't just walk in the snow," he said, his voice rough with the cold he had endured. I rode for 2 days, to the county seat, to the lawyer's office where you signed that paper, the one you thought was just a land deal." She stared at the new papers. "This," he said, tapping the first one, "is the deed to the Langford Ranch, the real one, filed by your father's lawyer. It was filed with a quit claim, signed by your father a month before he died. It gives you the land, free and clear, with no conditions. Your father, he gave you the cage, Evelyn, but he gave you the key, too." She looked at the paper, her vision blurring. Her father. "And this," he said, his voice dropping, "is from Brother Hobb." She looked. It was a letter, written in the preacher's shaky hand. It was a sworn affidavit. "I married them," it read, and though it was a hurried thing, and one I mistrusted, "I have seen them since. I have seen a man who was a ghost return to the living. I have seen a woman who was lost find a home. The Lord's business is not always clean, but what they have is true. I swear this on my own soul." Evelyn's legs gave out. She sank onto the stool, her hands covering her mouth. Elias stood over her, his shadow falling on the table. "I went to face the lie. Evelyn," he said, his voice raw. "You came to me with a lie. Your father lived a lie. Silas is a lie. And I have lived a lie for 10 years. A monster, a ghost, a man who burns things." He leaned down, his hands on the table, his face inches from hers. "We may have lied at first, both of us, but what we have now, in this cabin, on that land, it is real, and I will not run from it." She looked up at him, the tears streaming down her face. He was not the man who had left. He was the man who had come back. He had not run. He had been fighting. For her. For them. She launched herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her legs around his waist. He caught her, his arms locking around her, holding her up as if she weighed nothing. She was sobbing, a different kind of sob, a sound of profound, painful gratitude. "You came back," she whispered into his neck. "You came back." He held her, his face buried in her hair, breathing in the scent of her. "I'm not a ghost, Evelyn," he whispered. "I'm just a man, and I'm tired of running." He held her for a long time, and the cold, dead cabin was finally warm again. The warning came that night. They were asleep, tangled in the bedroll, a new, deeper peace between them. Elias woke first. He did not wake to a sound. He woke to a smell. Smoke, not the familiar, safe smell of the wood stove. This was the acrid, resinous, hungry smell of burning. He was out of the bedroll in one motion, his body reacting with a primal terror he had not felt in 10 years. He ripped the door open. It was not the cabin. It was the barn, the one they had been mending, the one that held their future. The north wall was engulfed, flames licking up the dry, old timber, casting a hellish, dancing orange light on the snow. Evelyn was at his side, her hand over her mouth, a small, terrified sound in her throat. "Silas," she whispered. He did this." Elias did not answer. He was not looking at Evelyn. He was staring into the flames. He was not seeing the barn. He was seeing a different building. A ranch house. He was hearing the screams of a child. He was feeling the heat on his face, the searing pain in his shoulder. The red haze was back. The rage, the one he had tasted in the saloon, was now a roaring inferno, hotter than the one in front of him. "He didn't just burn the barn," Elias whispered. His voice a sound Evelyn had never heard. It was not human. It was the sound of an animal, trapped and wounded, preparing to kill. He burned them." He turned, his movement stiff, robotic. He walked to the wall where his rifle hung. He took it down. He walked to his box and took out a shell. Then another. He began, with slow, deliberate, terrifying calm, to load the gun. "Elias?" Evelyn's voice was thin. He did not answer. He checked the action of the rifle. "Elias, what are you doing?" "He wants a monster," Elias said, his voice flat and dead. "He wants the man who burns. I'm going to show him." "No," she said, her voice rising. "No, Elias, it's just wood. It's what he wants. He wants you to do this." "He wants to take everything from me," Elias said, shrugging on his heavy coat. "He wants to prove I'm a savage. He wants to burn my life down." He looked at her, and his eyes were the hollow, dead eyes of the man she had met 2 months ago. He'll just be the second man to do it. He was at the door. He was going to hunt Silas. He was going to go to town, and he was going to kill him. And he would hang. She would lose him, not to a posse, but to himself. "Elias, stop!" She screamed, and she threw herself in front of the door, her small body a useless barrier. "Don't you see? This is the fire. This is your fire, the one you told me about, the one that took your life. Don't let him do it. Don't let him be the one who finally turns you into the monster they all see." He stopped, his hand on the door latch. He looked at her, his face a mask of torment. She was sobbing, her hands flat on his chest, as if she could hold him back. "I don't want you to go back to who you were. I don't want that man. I want my husband, the man who came back, the man who brought me the papers, the man who holds me when I dream. Please, Elias, don't leave me. Don't become him." He looked down at her, at this small, fierce, brave woman who was fighting, not for a barn, but for his soul. "He burned our home," Elias choked out, the rage and the grief fighting in his throat. "Then what do I have left to fight for?" He roared. "He burns it. He takes the law. He takes you. Tell me what is left. Evelyn?" She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and soot, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Then give me something to fight for," he whispered, his voice breaking. She did not hesitate. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling his face down to hers. "This," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Me? Us." She kissed him, a desperate, smoky kiss, a claiming. "Fight for this, Elias, not with a gun, not in the dark. Fight for us in the light, in the town, with these." She reached back and slapped the papers on the table. "Fight him with the truth. That is a fight you can win. A fight we can win." He stared at her, the red haze in his eyes slowly receding, replaced by a dawning, agonizing clarity. He was not a monster. He was her husband. He leaned his forehead against hers. His rifle was still in his hand, a heavy, useless weight. "He will kill us," he whispered. "He'll use his money, his men." "No," she said, pulling back, her eyes hard. "He's a coward. He burns things in the night. He's afraid of you. He's afraid of this. Show them, Elias. Show the town. Show all of them what is real." He let the rifle slide from his hand. It clattered to the floor. He looked at the burning barn, a funeral pyre for their past. Then he looked at her. He scooped her up, his arm under her legs, and carried her to the bedroll. He did not put her down gently. He dropped her, his body following hers, covering her. This was not the slow, healing love of before. This was a claiming. It was a fierce, urgent, desperate act. It was two people, with their home burning down, clinging to the only thing that could not be taken. It was a promise, made with teeth and hands and skin. It was life itself, a raw, defiant scream against the darkness and the flames. They made love while the barn collapsed, the sound of falling timbers a drumbeat to their hearts. They clung to life. The next morning, they rode into town. They did not look like victims. Elias was in his cleanest buckskins, his rifle not in his hands, but in its scabbard on Jed's side. Evelyn wore the same trousers, but she had mended her blue wool jacket, and she wore it like armor. Her hair was braided, her chin high. They did not ride to the saloon. They rode to the mission, where the circuit judge was holding court. The mission was packed. The whole town was there. Silas was in the front row, his 2 hired men at his side. He looked clean, pressed, and confident. He smiled when he saw them enter. Judge Tanner, Silas's lawyer, a slick man from the county seat, began, "We are here to petition for an annulment of the marriage of Evelyn Langford to Elias Granger on the grounds of coercion, and to file for the immediate seizure of the Langford property, as per this binding contract, signed by her late father." He placed the contract on the judge's table. Judge Tanner, a man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much, looked at the papers. He looked at Silas, then he looked at Elias and Evelyn, standing in the back. "Mr. Granger, Mrs. Granger, seems you two have caused a storm." "They are a storm, Your Honor," the lawyer said. "This man," he pointed at Elias, "is a known recluse, a violent man. He assaulted my client just 2 days ago. He is a man who, 10 years ago, was run out of this territory for burning a family in their beds." The mission exploded in whispers. "Burned! Monster! And he did it again!" Silas cried out, standing up, his voice ringing with false grief. "Last night, in a fit of rage, he burned his own barn to the ground to keep me from claiming it. The man is mad! He is a danger! I demand he be arrested!" The whispers turned to shouts. "Burned it? He's mad!" "He's right," Elias said. His voice cut through the noise. It was not a shout. It was a deep, calm rumble that silenced the room. He walked forward, Evelyn at his side. He did not look at Silas. He looked at the judge. "He's right," Elias said again. "The barn burned. I did see it." The town held its breath. "But I didn't set it," Elias said. He looked at Silas, his gaze hard as iron. "A man who sets a fire in the night is a coward. He doesn't want the thing he's burning. He just wants to watch the other man lose it." He turned back to the judge. "He says I'm a savage. He says I'm a monster. Maybe I am, but I am not a liar." He placed his papers on the table. "This is the deed to our ranch, signed and filed, free and clear. It is not his." He placed the preacher's letter down. "This is the sworn word of Brother Hobb, who is in this room. He will tell you our marriage is real. It is not a fraud." He turned, not to the judge, but to the town. He faced the people who had whispered about him, hated him, feared him. "You all know me," he said. 10 years, I have been the ghost, the man who burns. And I was a man who ran, I was a man who hid, because I believed it too. I believed I was a curse." He reached down and he took Evelyn's hand. He pulled her to his side. "This woman, she ran, too, from him, from a man who thinks a contract is a cage and a woman is a piece of property." He held her hand up, their joined hands, his scarred and rough, hers small and calloused, for the whole town to see. "We may have started in a lie, but we built a truth. He wants to talk about paper." He looked at Silas, his eyes burning with a fire that was not rage, but life. "I challenge him. I challenge him to prove anything real in this court. Show us the love. Show us the partnership. Show us the home you built with your own 2 hands." He turned back to the crowd. "He can't. All he has is paper. All he has is ash. We have this land, and we have each other, and we are not running." The mission was silent. The townspeople, Henderson, the women who had sneered, the men who had whispered, they were not looking at a monster. They were looking at a husband. They were looking at a wife. Silas was pale. This is an outrage. He's a killer. He is a hero, a voice called from the back. It was Brother Hob. He was standing, his thin face flushed. I saw that woman when she arrived. I saw her today. That is the work of salvation, not savagery. I stand by my letter. Their marriage is real in the eyes of God, and it should be in the eyes of this town. I agree, Henderson, the store owner, said, standing slowly. He may be rough, but they paid for my peaches, and they paid in gold. A small laugh riled through the room. Judge Tanner looked at the papers. He looked at Silas, who was sputtering. He looked at Elias and Evelyn, who stood, hand in hand, unmovable. He picked up Silas's contract, and he tore it in half. Mr. Croft, the judge said, his voice mild. A contract for a human soul ain't worth the paper it's on in my court. This other deed, he tapped Elias's, is legal. The marriage certificate is legal. The land belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Granger. He looked at Silas's 2 hired men. As for the matter of the barn, I have no proof who set that fire, but I am ordering you and your men out of my jurisdiction. Now, you have 1 hour to be on the road. Silas's face was a mask of white, apoplectic rage. He was defeated, not by a gun, but by a truth. He looked at Evelyn one last time, his eyes full of venom. She did not flinch. She just held her husband's hand. Silas stormed out of the mission, his men trailing behind him. The sound of the door slamming, the only sound of his defeat. The walk back from the mission was a new kind of silence. It was not the cold, brittle quiet of their first weeks, nor the aching, guilty quiet of their misunderstandings. It was the deep, settled silence of a thing that has been tested to its breaking point and held. They did not speak. Elias just took Jed's reins, and with his other hand, he found hers. He did not lift her onto the mule. They walked, side by side, their hands clasped, leading the mule through the muddy main street of Gideon's Gulch. The town watched them. The whispers were gone. The sneers were gone. As they passed Henderson's store, the proprietor was on his porch. He didn't speak, but he met Elias's gaze, and he nodded. It was a small, curt gesture, a nod of respect, a nod that said, "Neighbor." They did not go back to the high cabin. The cabin had been a refuge, a prison, and a sanctuary, but its time was over. They walked straight to the ranch, to the smoldering black ruin of the barn. Elias stopped at the edge of the property, his eyes on the still smoking timbers. The barn he had just begun to mend was gone. The symbol of his future was a pile of ash. Evelyn watched his face, her heart tight. She saw the old shadow flicker in his eyes, the familiar specter of loss. He burned the barn, Elias said, his voice flat. No, Evelyn said, her voice clear and strong, pulling his gaze from the ruin. She stepped in front of him, her hands still holding his. He burned wood. That is all he burned. She turned and pointed to the dilapidated main house, the one with the caved-in roof and the broken windows. He didn't touch that. He didn't touch the bunkhouse. He didn't touch the land. She squeezed his hand. He just made it clear where we have to start. We don't need a barn yet. Elias, we need a home. He looked at her, at the soot on her cheek, at the unshakable iron in her spine. The shadow in his eyes receded, burned away by the light in hers. He had been a man who ran from fires. She was a woman who walked through them. He gave her a slow, tired, rusty smile. The roof's half gone. Then we'll build the other half, she said. Spring bloomed with the ferocity of a pent-up flood. The thaw was not a gentle melting. It was a cracking, roaring, vital explosion of life. The creek surged, no longer a trickle but a churning brown river. The snow vanished from the meadows, revealing a carpet of green so bright it hurt the eyes. The air, once sharp with ice, was now thick with the smell of damp earth, pine sap, and possibility. Their life began. They did not have the money to hire a crew. They had their 4 hands and the strength God gave them. They moved into the small, one-room bunkhouse, a drafty, cold box that was, for the first time, truly theirs. The work was a prayer. It was a penance. It was a building. Elias was a different man. The ghost of the mountain was gone, replaced by a man of impossible focus. He attacked the ranch, not with the blind rage of his past, but with the steady, creative purpose of his future. He taught Evelyn. He had assumed she would be a helper, a hindrance. He had been wrong. She was a partner. No, he would say, his voice a low rumble as she struggled with a warped beam. You're fighting it. Let the timber tell you where it wants to sit. Feel the grain. She would stop, her face flushed with frustration, and she would listen. She would run her calloused hands over the wood, feeling what he meant, and she would learn. She learned to mix chinking, to set shingles, to use a draw knife to peel logs until they were smooth and pale. In turn, she taught him, we cannot just buy cattle. Elias, she said one night, her brow furrowed over a ledger she had started. They were sitting in the bunkhouse, the one lantern casting a warm glow. We don't have the capital, but I've been reading this. It was one of her father's old books. It's about grazing rights. If we lease the high pasture, the land we don't own, from the government, we can run twice the herd for half the cost. He stared at her, baffled. I don't know reading like that. I don't know government. I do, she said, and a small, confident smile touched her lips. You build the fences. I'll build the business. Their lives, which had been two separate, jagged lines of flight, now wove together. They were a braid, each strand making the other stronger. They laughed. It was the strangest new sound on the ranch. Elias's laugh, which had been a pained bark, softened. It became a low, rolling chuckle. Usually when Evelyn, covered in mud, would swear at a stubborn mule in a way that would make a sailor blush, her laughter was easier. It was the sound of the creek, a bright, bubbling noise that he found himself working for, just to hear it. One evening, after a month of back-breaking work, they were sitting on the steps of the bunkhouse, watching the sun set. The air was warm. Evelyn had, the day before, ridden Jed up to the old mountain cabin. She had dug up a patch of wild columbines, their roots wrapped in a damp cloth. Now, she was planting them in the dirt by their doorstep. She was bringing beauty to this rough place. She was making it a home. Elias watched her, her dark hair pulled back, a streak of dirt on her nose. She was humming, a small, tuneless sound. He was overwhelmed by a feeling so powerful, so heavy, that it felt like a stone in his chest. It was not just love. It was a kind of reverence. He had been holding onto the secret in his pocket for weeks, carved in the dim light of the lantern after she had fallen asleep. He had been waiting for a sign, for a moment. This was it. He sat on the step beside her, his large frame suddenly awkward. He cleared his throat. She looked up, smiling. What is it? You look like you just swallowed a bee. His hand was shaking. He, who could face down a wolf, who could punch a rich man in a saloon, was terrified. He pulled the small object from his pocket. I made this, he said, his voice a rasp. It ain't gold. It ain't what you're used to. He held it out on his calloused palm. It was the ring. It was a simple, wide band of dark mountain mahogany, polished with oil until it shone with a deep, red luster, carved into its surface, with the precise, loving detail of his whittling, was a circle of mountain peaks, their lines flowing one into the next, with no beginning and no end. Evelyn's breath caught. She put her muddy hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. Elias, she whispered. She picked it up. It was warm from his hand. She looked at the mountains, their mountains, the ones that had imprisoned them, and the ones that had saved them. Her left hand was bare, the crude, greasy leather thong he had put on her finger at the wedding. She wore it on a string, under her shirt. She had never taken it off. Slowly, she held out her hand. He took it. His fingers trembled as he slid the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She stared at it, the dark wood against her skin, the calloused skin, the dirt under her nails. This was not the hand of Evelyn Langford, heiress. This was the hand of Evelyn Granger, rancher. She lifted her eyes to his. "This is real," she whispered. It was not a question. It was a statement. This ring, this land, this man, this life. Elias's throat was tight. He could only nod. "It always was," he said, his voice thick. "From the first, even when we were lying. The rest of it, that was the pretending." She didn't thank him. She just leaned forward, put her dirty hands on his rough face, and kissed him. It was not the desperate, fiery kiss of their nights. It was a kiss of peace, of homecoming. It was a promise. Weeks turned into months. The bunkhouse was solid. The first section of the new barn was framed. They rode into town, this time not for a fight, but for supplies. It was different. The air of scandal was gone. When they rode down the main street, Elias on Jed, Evelyn on a strong gray mare she had bought with her first bit of egg money. The locals no longer stopped to stare. They nodded. "Mr. Granger." "Mrs. Granger." It was simple. It was cautious. But it was respect. At Henderson's store, the proprietor, who had once refused to serve them, now rushed forward. "Mr. Granger! Ma'am, got that new shipment of axle grease you were asking on. And Mrs. Granger, I saved you a bolt of that blue cotton. Figured you might be tired of buckskin." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Evelyn said, her smile genuine. "I appreciate that. And, Henderson stammered, looking at Elias. "Your credit, well, it's good here. Pay when the herd sells." Elias stopped. He looked at the man. For 10 years, his name had been a curse, his presence a threat. Now, a man was offering him credit. On his word alone. He stuck out his hand. "I'm obliged to you, Henderson." They shook, and in that simple gesture, Elias Granger, the monster, died. And Elias Granger, the rancher, was born. They were not just building a ranch. They were building a community. Evelyn had seen the children. The boy from the livery, Tom, the other children of the valley, the trappers' and miners' sons, who ran wild, their faces dirty, their futures as unformed as the mud on the street. They were bright, but they were ignorant. She went to Brother Hobb. "I have no money to offer the church," she said, standing in the small, clean mission where her life had changed. "Mrs. Granger," the preacher said, smiling, "you and your husband have given this town more than money. You've given it a story of redemption. What is it you need?" "An education," she said. "I have one. They do not let me use the mission. 2 days a week, 3 hours. I want to start a school." The first day, 5 children showed up, shoved in by curious mothers. They were unruly, loud, and smelled of wood smoke and bacon. They looked at this fine Eastern woman with open suspicion. She did not try to teach them letters. She did not try to teach them sums. She just sat down, opened one of the few books she had saved from her carriage, and began to read. She read them a story of knights and dragons and faraway seas. Her voice, clear and trained, wove a spell in the small, quiet church. The children, who had never heard such a thing, went silent. Their mouths hung open. They edged closer. When she finished the chapter, she closed the book. "That's all for today," she said. "But what happens next?" Tom, the livery boy, demanded. Evelyn smiled. "Come back on Thursday, and if you want to read it for yourself, I can teach you how." She had them. Elias found his own calling. The ranch was too much for one man. He needed help. But no ranch hand would work for the man who burns. He found Tom at the livery. "You're good with horses," Elias said, his voice a low grunt. "Yes, sir." "You want to learn cattle? Fences. It's hard work. Harder than this. Pays low." The boy's eyes lit up. "You mean work for you, Mr. Granger? On the ranch?" "I mean it." "I don't want pay, sir," the boy said, his voice earnest. "I want to learn. I want to learn what you know. How you build things." Elias was taken aback. He'd never been a teacher. He'd never been anything but a pair of hands. He nodded, gruffly. "Tomorrow, sunrise. Don't be late." He started with Tom, then another boy, the son of a blacksmith, joined. Elias taught them. He was not a gentle teacher. He was gruff, impatient, and demanding. But he was fair. He was patient in a way he never knew he could be. "No, not like that," he'd say, stopping a boy from swinging an axe. "You're using your back. You'll be broke by the time you're 30. Use your legs. Let the tool do the work." He was not just teaching them to be ranch hands. He was teaching them to be men. He was, without ever meaning to, building a family. He was becoming the father, the protector, that he had failed to be 10 years ago. He was mending his own broken past by building their futures. The seasons turned. Summer was hot, dry, and full of the smell of cut hay. Autumn was a blaze of gold and red, the air crisp with the promise of cold. And then, one night in late spring, a full year after they had stood before the judge, a late snow began to fall. It was not a blizzard, it was a gentle, quiet dusting, a last soft breath of winter. Elias and Evelyn were in the main house. They had rebuilt it. It was not the grand mansion her father had planned. It was a solid, 2-story ranch house, built of timber Elias had felled himself, with a great stone hearth he had built with his own hands, so safe and strong that a fire was, at last, just a fire. Evelyn stood at the new glass window, wrapped in a quilt. She watched the large, soft flakes drift down, piling on the new fence rails. Elias came up behind her. He had been mending a bridle, the smell of leather and oil filling the warm room. He put his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. He rested his chin on her hair. "It was snowing," she whispered. "The day I came here. Do you remember? I was so angry." "I remember," he rumbled, his voice by her ear. "You were like a wet cat, all hiss and claws." She smiled, leaning her head back against him. They stood in silence, watching the white world. "Elias," she said, her voice small, "do you regret it? Agreeing to the wedding?" He knew what she was asking. "Do you regret me? Do you regret the trouble I brought? Do you regret that I lied?" He turned her around in his arms, his gaze steady. He looked at her, at his wife, at her face, which was no longer the pale, angry mask of an heiress, but a strong, beautiful face, kissed by the sun and wind. He didn't just answer her. He bent, sliding one arm under her legs and the other behind her back, and lifted her into his lap as if she weighed nothing. He carried her to the chair by their fire and sat, holding her. He kissed her forehead, a long, tender kiss, a kiss of promise, of peace. "Only one thing," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he no longer fought. "Only that I waited so long to mean it. The story ends not in that night, but in a morning, a silent morning, weeks later, when the last of the snow was gone for good, and the new spring was truly here. Mist hung low in the high valleys, a soft, gray blanket over the peaks. Smoke curled from the chimney of the ranch house, a thin, blue line against the dawn sky. 2 people stood at the edge of the rebuilt pasture. They were not talking. They were just standing, hand in hand, looking out. They watched the new grass, green and bright. They watched their small herd of cattle, dark shapes moving in the mist. They watched the strong new fences, a dark line drawn against the wilderness. Elias Granger and Evelyn Granger, a mountain man and an heiress. They stood at the edge of the life they had built, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer pretending anything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. This is From Wild West, and my greatest wish is to share these tales with folks from all over. Please, take a moment to comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. I read every one. If you enjoyed this story, I would be honored if you would subscribe to From Wild West for more tales of the frontier. And finally, please share your thoughts on the story in the comments. Your words mean the world to an old storyteller. Thank you again.